case you didn't know, crazy about you. And I would be lying if I said that I could live this life without you. Even though I don't tell you all the time, you had my heart a long time ago. Yeah, you had my heart a long time ago. In case you didn't know, no, in case you didn't know. You are my fire, the one desire. Believe when I say I want it that way. But we are two worlds apart. Can't reach to your heart when you say that I want it that way. Tell me why it ain't nothing but a heartache. Tell me why.
So this is the first one. The A is -2, but the amplitude itself is +2. So remember, amplitude can never be negative. The negative tells you that you're flipping upside down. The B is 1, so the period is 2 pi. From there, you get your original key points, which would be 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. And then this time there's a phase shift. So if there's something inside the parentheses, you want to set it equals 0, solve it. The phase shift is a positive pi, which means everything shifted to the right pi. I added those on, and you get these 5 key points. And then that's what you're going to plot. So pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi, 5 pi over 2, and 3 pi. And then it's signed, so it normally starts at 0 and goes up to the amplitude, but because it's negative, it's going down. That's the green curve. So starts at 0, goes down to -2, back up to 0, up, back down again. But then this time there's a a vertical shift. So that up 1 takes my graph and shifts everything up 1 unit. So you should result in that red line. You could choose to keep both. You could just graph the one at the end. I don't care, as long as you some way distinguish to me what your answer should be. So if that means different colored pencils, if it means a darker line with your pencil, it means erasing the original one. I don't care, as long as you can indicate to me which one should be your overall answer. Okay. Questions on that one? And the next one was cosine. So again, A is 2, but this time it's a +2, so that's your amplitude. B is 2, which means the period is pi, because it'd be 2 pi over pi. And then your key points are pi times 1/4, which would be pi over 4, pi times 1/2, which is pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and then the last one's pi, first one's 0. There's no phase shift this time. So when you graph those points, those are your key points. I'd start at 0, and then pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and pi. This time it's cosine, so it starts at the amplitude. So I'm going to go up to 2, plot a point there, down, down, up, up. That's my curve initially. Again, this time there's a vertical shift. This time it's down 1. So all of these points get moved down 1 place. And that's what your answer should look like. Again, you don't need both, but you do have both. You want to make sure that you distinguish between the answer and the one before it shifted. All right, this is the cotangent one. So A was 3, which is your amplitude. That's how high up and how low it's going to go at that 1/4 and the 3/4 point. B is 1, and remember that the period for cotangent and tangent is pi over b. Then for cotangent, we set it equal to 0 and pi. Solve, so what's inside the parentheses, solve that and you get x equals pi and x equals 2 pi. Those are your middle two asymptotes. Then from the one on the left, you want to subtract the period. To the one on the right, you want to add the period, and you end up with your additional two asymptotes, x equals 0 and 3 pi. So then when you plot those, that's 0, that's pi, that's 2 pi, that's 3 pi. Those are your asymptotes. So there's a line there, through pi, through 2 pi, and through 3 pi. So then you got to find your point halfway between those points. These should be exact. So halfway between 0 and pi is pi over 2, halfway between pi and 2 pi, 3 pi over 2, and halfway between 2 pi and 3 pi is 5 pi over 2, or 2.5 pi. It's going to ask you for where are your asymptotes. So remember, you're going to give those to me as lines, which means x equals, right? So x equals 0, pi, 2 pi, and 3 pi in this case. And then it's going to ask you for your intercepts, and you're going to give these to me in point coordinate, or coordinate point form. So this would be pi over 2, 0, 3 pi over 2, 0, and 5 pi over 2, 0. So then the quarter point and the 3/4 point you can kind of eyeball, but that's how high up and how low those points are going to go. This is cotangent, so it goes up, left, and down, right. So it goes up to 3 on the left, down to 3 on the right, up to 3 on the left, down to 3 on the right, and then up to 3 on the left, down to 3 on the right, and then you get your curve. So again, that would be cotangent. Questions on that one? Yep. But you don't shift these the way you shift the other ones. That's how you find your asymptote. So that's why doing bx minus c already takes care of the shift. Yeah. This is tangent. So this was negative. So although it's tangent, which normally points up to the right and down to the left like the yellow, you have to flip it because it's negative. So the a is -2, which is again upside down. The a absolute value of that would be 2, which is your amplitude. And then I'd set what's inside here. So the b is 2. That means the period is pi over 2. Set this equal to negative pi over 2 and positive pi over 2 because this is tangent. Solve, and you get the asymptotes at x equals pi over 4 and x equals 3 pi over 4. To the one on the left, you're going to subtract pi over 2, and you get x equals negative pi over 4. Add pi over 2, and you get x equals 5 pi over 4. Those are your 4 asymptotes. And then you got to find the point halfway between. So here it's 0, here it's pi over 2, here it's pi. Those are your intercepts. And then because it's negative tangent, at the quarter point we go up to 2, at the 3/4 point down to -2, up, down, and the white curve should have been your final answer. Questions on those? Okay, then this one was your cosecant. So cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. You're going to first graph sine. So A is -2, which means it's upside down. The absolute value of 2 would be 2. That's your amplitude. This x over 2 means your B is 1/2. And then 2 pi over 1/2 becomes 4 pi. That's your period. So it's going to ask for amplitude. It's going to ask for period. And then from there, good morning, you find your key points. You're going to multiply times the 4th, 1/2, thank you, and 3/4. And this time there's a phase shift. So I set whatever's inside this parentheses equal to 0, and I end up with a phase shift to the right, 2 pi. So to each of those key points, I'm adding 2 pi, and that's where I get my 5 adjusted key points. So the first one's 2 pi, then 3 pi, then 4 pi, then 5 pi, then 6 pi. I would start at 0 because this is negative sign, go down, up, up, down. And then I need to continue my curve so that I have another asymptote because I only have 3 right now. Technically, this should actually come back down if you draw it to scale before pi, because that distance should have been 2 pi, like from here to here is 2 pi, so from here to here, 2 pi. Everywhere there's an x-intercept is your asymptote, and then your curves bounce off of the maxes and the mins, which is what looks there. Why is the what? Because you have to solve this by setting it equal to 0, so that's what's here. So this equals 0. I add the pi, and then I get x over 2 equals pi, and then I multiply by 2, and I get x equals 2 pi. And then there's no vertical shift on this one, so it stays where it is. Questions on that one? Mm-hmm. Okay, last one is secant. So you're graphing cosine 3 cosine pi x over 2 minus 1. So your A and your amplitude are 3. Your B is actually pi over 2 because that's what's attached to the x. So then the period would be 2 pi over 2, which becomes 4. The key points are at 1, 2, 3, and then the first one's at 0, the last one's at 4. There's no phase shift this time. So those are your key points, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that gave me my initial curve. This was again secant, so I graphed cosine, which started at 3. So this is my original one. Started at 3, went down, down, up, up. And then I dropped a half a curve and a half a curve on the left and the right so that I get my 4 asymptotes. Before you move it vertically, my advice is to find your asymptotes, because your asymptotes are easy when it's at 0. It's wherever it's your actual 0, which were here, 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 and here. Once you start to shift your graph, it makes it harder to identify those points. but it did shift down one, which is why the green, the ending curve, the answer should have been the green curves. Remember for sine, cosine, for tangent, cotangent, secant, and cosecant, that you should end up having 4 asymptotes and 3 curves for all of them. Okay, for sine and cosine, you're just giving me a single period. But for these, you need 4 asymptotes, 3 curves. And again, it's going to ask you for amplitude. It's going to ask you for a period. It's going to tell you to label your key points on your graph and then ask for phase shift and vertical shift. So you got to give me all those points. When it comes to the asymptotes on the cotangent and the tangent, you make sure you give me those in equation form and then your exact points for your intercepts. Questions overall on the graphing. So it's not all of it, obviously. It's 25 points, but it is a good chunk. Yep. For tangent and cotangent, yeah. Yeah, it's going to ask for the intercept. Yep. Sorry? 3. You're either getting sine or cosine, and then you're getting the other one's reciprocal function, and then you're getting tangent or cotangent.